coming to Ishpreet, venture debt as an asset class is not very well established in India, and there are a handful of firms before you came in and trying to establish this whole new fund called Stride Ventures. So, how does Stride Ventures fit into the whole ecosystem? How do you look at startups providing debt and so on and so forth? Can you throw some light, please?
Sure, Ashutosh. Thanks for inviting me. Basically, I think for the larger understanding of the audience, Stride is a venture debt fund registered with SEBI. It's a Category 2 fund with a target corpus of 500 crores. Basically, venture debt as an asset class, since you're talking about alternate source of funding, it works typically well for startups who are generally considered early in their journey or in fact in the growth stage as well, where this is an alternate source of funding provided where you have raised a round of venture capital. And basically, generally startups do not have collaterals with them. This is the way in which you can get them funding for working capital, extend their runway, and over a period of time it gets repaid, while uh, it it also doesn't part away with the equity of the founders, so it protects on the dilution. This is about the asset class in general, just for larger understanding. But within that, how we are trying to establish our niche is that we are more of a working capital led fund. We basically come in with, as you rightly said, we come in at a Series A stage as well, which means that if a company has raised an institutional round of funding and they want to leverage or solve their working capital issues, it can be in various forms, where rather than deploying equity of the business, they can use and have an access to the debt. So typical uses happens to be possibly, if we talk about SaaS companies, technology oriented companies, logistics sector or some other sectors, any particular sector who are targeting large corporate enterprises, there tend to be a timeline in terms of payable days to them, right? Which ends up blocking your equity. There can be inventory-led models where you have procured inventory, but it gets trickled over a period of time. There can be possible capital expenditure, heavy capital expenditure in some of the startups, depending on what nature of business you are in. So there are various forms of requirements, bank guarantees, which you might have to give, right? So basically, all of this requires, since a startup only has an access to equity generally, it requires the equity to be deployed, and hence the runway or your uh, achievement in terms of going larger in revenues gets curtailed. That's where venture debt comes in and plays a critical role. And that's how we've established in Stride. We generally do up to 18 months of loan. We can go up to $3 million of funding for a particular startup. We are generally sector agnostic, but we like more of cash flow based businesses. Our thesis is majorly coming from a banking background, is that if a business is generating cash flow, they might be EBITDA negative companies because of the growth, but if they're generating cash flows and cash flows can service debt, while a bit of runway is there in terms of equity as well, for the larger structure to play in. In terms of our background, we've been fairly active in this ecosystem for past 5 years. We've been early lenders to companies like Lending Cart at very early stage, Bira, which is a beer brand, Rivigo, which is a logistics company, League. And now with the fund, we have already in the past 7 months, we've done 3 transactions. We're announcing 1 transaction next week. So we've done a company called Stellapps, which we've made public, which is an agri-tech company. And the other is an education startup. And the third one is a two-wheeler brand. So basically, we are fairly active because of the structure which we do. We personally believe and fairly well confident that this ecosystem will dwell a lot, especially post-COVID era, when you'll see a lot of equity or the valuations getting a little dry. I think debt can play a critical role here. We also work very closely with the financial ecosystem for all our portfolio companies. In fact, we're working with HSBC as well for some of the things. But yeah, Indian private banks, public sector banks, we work very closely. That's about us, basically.
Thank you, Ishpreet, and we'll cover some of those aspects in terms of how you look at the debt, what are the various covenants of debt and documentation, all of that. I'll come to it very shortly. Regan, can you talk about Expedise? That is probably one of the least understood model of cash and dynamic discounting. What does it mean for corporates, and what does it mean specifically for suppliers?
I think so in this time where, let me use a line that a client gave me. He said, top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, and cash is king. I think so it is very, very important in times like these where you are able to understand the differentiation between $1 of revenue and $1 of cash. The entire genesis of Expertise and the thought process behind was that there are a lot of large set of suppliers supplying to blue chip companies who are going out in the market and raising debt. But the simple reason is that they have their receivables are stuck in their working capital cycle. Expertise comes in as a completely digital platform and help these suppliers get their money early on their accepted invoices. We ensure that the buyer on the other side also has the option to fund these requests either through internal funds or through external funds. Expertise has also had a layer on top where we can do e-way bill authentication, GST authentication, and help basically the ecosystem avoid any fraudulent transaction as well. So that is where Expertise, the genesis came in. If you look at it from a supplier perspective, he mainly goes out in the market to borrow because he has a large set of receivable which is going to be paid after a duration of time. The moment you can reduce that cycle from 30 days, 60 days, 90 days to 2 days, 3 days, the number of times he can revolve his cash in the business itself helps him grow exponentially. On the other side, the buyer also gets the advantage by reducing his cost of goods sold. And all of this is done seamlessly over a digital platform. So the idea was to reduce this cycle from a 60, 90 days to 2 to 3 days and create a win-win situation for both the buyer and the supplier at the same time. So as you see, if you look at a supplier balance sheet, for example, he has a 90-day receivable currently standing. For his working capital, he goes out in the market and borrows. And then that borrowing leads to his cash. However, if you can get onto the Expertise platform, reduce the entire cycle, then what you're basically doing is your sales to cash instead of 60 days or 90 days is now 2 days, 3 days. So if you have a limited amount of capital, how many times can you churn it in a year is what is most important. Expertise is completely sector agnostic. Unlike the others, we are a startup as well. So a lot of pointers that we will speak during the discussion will be both from a perspective of Expertise and we as a startup, how we are able to and seeing this market. We currently are supporting over 4,500 suppliers onto the platform, and this number is ever growing constantly.
Makes sense. Regan, thank you so much for talking about Expertise and how suppliers and corporates both can benefit from this platform. Coming to the general covenants of debt, that is the asset class for particularly for you, Alok, and for you, Ishpreet, right? If a founder or a CEO of a company is looking to raise debt from you, what are the general covenants that you insist upon? What does the founder should look at in the documentation in order to actually be successful in raising debt from you?
So if I may start,
Yeah.
The ability to raise debt is typically not limited by the covenants, right? The covenants is almost the terms that come towards the end to make sure that the assumptions under which the debt is getting sanctioned continue to hold true. But the first step really is the assessment for the debt process itself, right? Where the past track record of the company or the promoter in terms of having repaid their obligations is an important one. It's an indicator of their continuing intent to service that debt. Equally important is the cash flow profile of the company and the ability of the company to service the debt. The third thing that we look for is we want to make sure that debt goes in generating incremental revenue rather than in funding current burn of the company. Right. So the use of funds and the potential of those funds to be deployed productively to generate incremental revenue and cash is a key part of the assessment. Now, once all of that is done and we have determined the ability of the company to pay back a certain amount of debt and productively deploy it, Then the notion of governance comes in, which is largely structured around what are the current assumptions on how the business will be run. It might have to do with the debt to equity mix. It might have to do with cash flows, ability to service those debts, things of that nature. But typically the covenants are more maintenance mode covenants, if I may call them that, rather than necessarily something that presents a business as usual risk going forward.
Got it. Got it.
Uh,
Alok.
yeah,
Ishpreet,
so
would you like to take this ahead? Yeah.
sure. If I just add to what Alok said, he rightly said, because basically the genesis is about funding SME and MSME. The difference with us in this asset class is that basically you're funding startups, right? Which majorly would be EBITDA negative companies. So the covenants would not be traditional lending covenants or banking covenants. You would have to look covenants beyond basically debt to equity of the world or the current ratios. They play an aspect, but not to that large extent. So basically, in terms of us looking at early stage companies or good stage companies, basically we look at what kind of liquidity the company is maintaining. But before that, I think comes the cash flows of the business, right? Because generally in startup ecosystem, as of now, we have not been aware about too many companies generating cash flows.
Yeah.
The eminent question would come in that if they are generating very positive cash flows, why they take venture debt? But the basic premise is that the cash flows are getting generated. These businesses, so for example, in today's time, there are certain segments which are generating cash flows in spite of lockdowns, right? These might be direct to consumer brands or education companies or other kind of companies, but cash flows are coming in. Similarly, in traditional course of business, logistics companies, logistics startups, financial, for that matter, financial services as well, though I think we can have a larger discussion about fintechs. But all of these companies basically generate cash flows in NIM form or other forms to pay back the debt, right? So our covenants will be generally monitored around the sales hygiene, the debtor days, the receivable cycle, basically, and some bit of cash which services of debt in case of some stress, which we are seeing in today's time. Plus, on top of that, we generally have, since it's early stage companies, too much of debt can also kill them. So not going beyond a certain level on the debt, some bit of current ratios in order to make sure the receivables are not getting too elongated, the net worth of the company is not getting too much eroded. And basically what Alok said, ultimately there are softer comforts which you derive out of the founders, which on the basis of which covenants, for example, in our kind of setup, we can't afford a CEO stepping down or a founder stepping down. Yeah. Because on the basis of that, you've taken a credit call. So that might be a very softer covenant, but it's always a part of non-financial covenant for us, where we're saying that at least the operational control has to be with the founder and the CEO, right? So these kind of covenants we generally work with. It depends on case-to-case basis.
No, this is great, Ishpreet, and this gives at least an idea, Alok and Ishpreet, when you talked about these covenants, it gives an idea that, okay, if I'm a startup founder or a CEO, what should I look at? How, in what shape and form my business should be in order to actually approach you and have a very good chance of actually getting access to capital from you. Thanks a lot, Prakash. Now, between the four panelists here, I'm sure the attendees, the startups, now have a lot of information about variety of products that are available in the market. And everyone is right now customizing their products anyways for better applicability and to help the MSME and startup ecosystem in these troubled times, right? Let me take the onus of talking about two more initiatives which are launched particularly for COVID affected companies. One is an initiative by SBI, where they are providing enhanced working capital limits to the tune of close to 200 crores of additional funding, up to, it's always up to. So up to 200 crores of funding per company as additional working capital limits for their existing borrowers and clients. So that is one initiative just launched about 10 days back by SBI. Another initiative is launched by SIDBI, where SIDBI is coming up with a specific COVID affected startups. You can go to the SIDBI website, or we will obviously put it in our resource center, where they are inviting applications from COVID specific startups to get loan up to 2 crores at very very benevolent terms and conditions. And there is a 36 months repayment period and 12 months moratorium period, and all of that. So there are few more initiatives which are launched. Ishpreet, would you like to talk about the whole IBC changes here? That is another very COVID specific initiative.
Yes, I think I'll just try to cover this from a larger perspective.
Yeah.
So it's very important to know that all of us are naturally reading a lot about coronavirus and the effects and the new normal and all the new caveats, the curves which are coming up, U, V, and all that. But I think from an optimistic perspective, what we have seen is there has been a projection of IMF stating that India will grow at 1.9%, which is the largest amongst the G20 countries, right? And we are seeing a sharper V curve for the next year in terms of 7.5% growth. So first of all, whatever measures I think are coming in, it's an interim measure just to make sure that how we adjust towards the current effects, right? But I don't see this personally. I don't see this going a long way. If at all, in next 3 to 6 months, we have a little bit of normalcy coming in. So naturally, there are uncertainties. The caveat remains, but overall, I think those initiatives which you're speaking about, the IBC one, I'll quickly highlight. I think Alok can add on there because it's pertaining to more of NBFCs as well. Basically, what they've done is IBC's classification of insolvency bankruptcy code as of now had been a reporting of up to 1 lakh, above 1 lakh for any borrower who defaults there. As a lender, you can go and file for use the IBC codes and practices and initiate proceedings against the borrower, which in the COVID times, and that's applicable, I think till May end as of now, might get extended, has become 1 crore, right? It has some bit of effect, though it gives a lot of leeways to some of the lenders or some of the borrowers who lies in between 1 lakh to 1 crore, but it affects lenders, and there have been a lot of uncertainties towards that, what's happening. So from the lender's perspective, there has been some bit of relaxation, which has been announced by RBI yesterday. Our governor announced certain things over there in which there's 50,000 crores of liquidity infusion for NBFCs, smaller and mid ones. But basically, there is a larger effect on some bit of NBFC, especially the younger fintechs who have an NBFC model.
Yeah.
As of now, it naturally affects positively to some of the borrowers, but I have my two ways about it, because some of them might use it who might not be impacted as much, but they have an option available, right? So I think we have to use it prudently, thinking in mind that this is not a long-term phenomena. This is only for those people who have been impacted, and the genuineness and discipline in terms of repayments should prevail for companies who have been doing decently, if not impacted 100%. I think Alok possibly can want to add on some of these initiatives which the government has said, and especially in terms of NBFC, because we fall under SEBI. So the lucky aspect for us in terms of startups, Ashutosh, is that we, as of now, until unless, you're talking about more of amicable solution for a startup, we are not classified under NBFCs and hence not under RBI purview. So we are not supposed to pass on that relaxation. We are not, because we have set of investors who invest into a fund as a structure.
Yeah.
But for NBFCs, they might have to follow certain things there. Alok, do you want to add on there?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I think the IBC relaxation needs to be looked at in the overall scheme of things. There is also a moratorium that is going on right now. And I think as long as this remains, a time-bound relaxation, we are fairly confident that that process can be managed. If this starts to get extended too much, then there is a sense of entitlement that starts to creep in and spoil the overall credit culture. So I think that is what I would guard against. Interestingly, in IBC, there is a lender protection element to it, but especially on the personal sections of the IBC, there is a promoter protection that is not in effect yet. I think that could be one of the things for the regulators to look at. because my sense is a lot of MSME promoters may need that sort of protection through the crisis, depending on how long and how deep does that last. So it is in the act, but it's not in force right now, and that might be one thing to look at.
Yeah, I think there is a bit of ambiguity there. He's right. From a perspective, especially from a borrower's perspective, I think there should be more relaxed measures. That's where actually the ambiguity lies. The NBFC is not able to classify in that kind of manner. While for banks, there is a support from the perspective of RBI direct intervention. For NBFCs, because they have to pay back to the bankers, their book gets created, their leverage gets created of the banks. So I think they are the ones who are in soup. But yeah, I think overall there are certain relaxations announced yesterday. I'm sure it will be more streamlined over a period of time.
So Ishpreet, you talked about certain relaxations, and Alok talked about certain initiatives. Let me expand the question a little bit, and once again address it to Prakash and Alok. Right? What is your advice? If you can take 60 seconds to 90 seconds, just give pointed certain advice to the MSME and startup ecosystem on how to conserve cash. What are the things that one should focus on in today's day and time to effectively utilize whatever cash they have, their own cash, the cash that they have raised from you, wherever. What are some of the things that you would love to advise on?
Take it very proactively.
Yeah, and if I just quickly add my 60 seconds on this, I think you mentioned about startups and MSME impact and what they should do in this point of time, what we are speaking to our companies. I think there's a different effect to both of them, right? We have to segregate that. In startups especially, I think this is a time when when men will be differentiated from boys. The leadership capabilities will get tested of great leaders who are running the startups. As of now, they've got funding. If I'm talking about Series A companies and beyond, as of now, they've got funding. Now is the time that how they carry their team, right? The first branch, I think, should be that they should be naturally foregoing their salaries, their fixed costs, and leading by example in terms of reducing the cost. As put across by everyone, we've been hearing about cash is king. I think survival naturally becomes the most important aspect. If you can survive this phase, there's definitely a weaker for you as a startup. Right, and basically that's what we've been suggesting, that as much as deferment of salaries, as much as deferment of vendor payments, rental cost is I think everyone on the venture capital side is also suggesting. On MSME front, I think they are the one who are in a bigger trouble according to me, because from a startup perspective, then also you have some helping hand from one of the VCs or a couple of VCs to help you out, bail you out, give you additional fund, do a bridge round financing. Whether MSME will face a hit, as per my understanding, a lot of corporates have stopped paying as well. They're trying to hold on to their cash, right? So the payment, the supply chain financing also is taking a lot of impact, as rightly put across by both of them, Prakash and Regan. So basically, I think government measures has to step in if this prolongate. Post whatever, so this is in general, post if when we come out of this, right, there's definitely, I think there's a phrase called inch deep and mile wide. I think it will definitely work reverse. You need to be really mile deep in your business and inch wide in order to be a specialized player in an MSME or a startup. You have to be on top of your game. That's how you survive in today's world.
No, that's great, Ishpreet. And some of these things startups I have already seen some of these things starting to play out in terms of being specialized and starting to focus on just one thing that would really ensure their survivability. Alok, MSME segment, right? Ishpreet talked about that being in trouble, and they don't have that much areas where they can leverage to get financing. So what is your specific advice to MSME segment? How do they look at the current situation?
So Ashutosh, and I resonate with Ishpreet that there are multiple sub-segments hidden within this broad word, and the reactions are different. If I look at the micro end of the MSME, what I'm seeing is they typically don't have very high fixed cost structures, other than if they are renting out their shops. So they tend to operate on a fairly low fixed cost structure, and that's an advantage in these times, that even if they are not generating revenue for a bit, especially given that the moratoriums and everything are in force now, they don't have to service the loan for at least the next couple of months. I think they'll be fine. One reaction I'm seeing, which is quite entrepreneurial, is for them to twist and turn and see what else can they do. So we are seeing people, small shops which are not in essential services start to serve a little bit of essential services to make sure that the goods keep flowing. The larger, let's say small to mid-size companies, industries, there the flexibility in terms of what they do is limited, and the fixed costs normally are, higher than what you would see at the micro end of the spectrum. So for them, really, the conversation is about resuming operations. When can they do that? There is also a government scheme that has come out for people who are under 100 employees, especially in the blue collar segment, to help out with that process. Employees have access to their EPF funds. So I think understanding some of those schemes and being able to leverage may help those industries survive through at least the lockdown period and get back into a cash flow positive zone. And for startups, I think, while a small chunk of startups are venture funded, a lot of them are bootstrapped, but the conversation for all of them really has been around runway extension. So that is where we are seeing more drastic cost cuts being required by the business to make sure that they can tide through the next 12 to 15 months of negative cash burn, using whatever cash they have or bootstrap money that they have. So I think the cost actions are more prominent on that side of the house.
Got it. And Alok, you rightly mentioned, working capital runway. Working capital is one of the big factors in actually ensuring how much runway that you have.
Not really. Working capital should not be a determinant of that, because working capital today, the need for working capital is only to the extent that you are, stranded with stock in a warehouse.
No,
right?
so
If
that's
it just falls, working capital requirement should fall.
Yeah.
To that extent, using working capital to extend the runway might be exactly the wrong use of money.
The wrong use of fund, and you would not encourage people to actually utilize the fund just to extend the working capital, right? So then what is the alternative way to actually look at addressing your working capital requirements? Let's hear from Regan, because Regan exactly helps the suppliers in that dimension.
Yeah, thank you, Ashutosh. I think so it is very important to understand, and we've been hearing a lot of webinars and saying extend runway, cut costs, but you cannot have a one-size-fit-all approach. You cannot go hammer and tongs with every client of yours and say, hey, you know what, it is COVID time, we are in trouble, this is the problem, why don't you give us some money early, and have those conversations. I think so at Expertise, based on the various clients that we have and the different segments that we serve, we've come up with a small framework, and I think so this will be helpful for a lot of you guys as well. You basically identify your customers into two segments. One is essential, one is non-essential. The essential guys are going to do well, and in the future also, they will continue to do well. The second part is then you break down based on their balance sheet and their customers, saying, does this guy have a lot of cash on his balance sheet, or is he a perennial borrowing customer? If he has cash on his balance sheet, you should be proactive, as Prakash said. Go out, reach out to us, or funds or whatever you want to, but you should proactively put in an offer to him saying, I am willing to take early payment against a discount, given that you are an essential service, given that you have the cash, we have been a long-term supply. The second aspect is when the customer is borrowing. If the customer is borrowing as in essential services, like telecom, power, logistics, for that matter, please do not pressurize them right now, because they have a cycle themselves. And if you keep pressurizing them, they will get irritated when the time comes for vendor consolidation, which most likely will happen in the post-COVID era. You may be left out. So be very cognizant of that fact. The second part is then you go out and see what are your non-essential customers who have cash, luxury, retail, technology. Good to have that discussion, initiate that discussion.
Regan, your voice is coming a little bit unclear, and I have, yeah. Can you come?
Is this better?
Yeah, this is much better. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I was saying, when you have non-essential services and the customer has cash, you may think of companies like luxury retail, technology for that matter, have that discussion saying, would you want to look at an early payment option proactively? However, where companies which are non-essential and are borrowing in are severely impacted. Guys, please do not reach out to them all the time and say, can we have an early payment? Actually, this is the time to reach out to them and say, can we extend our tenure a little? Because from a B2B perspective, and I speak from a startup and a B2B perspective, your sales cycles are relatively long. You don't want to pressurize a customer in a situation where he actually has no leeway. So when you support a customer at this time, you are actually going to be in the good books when the next order comes in, hopefully in the next 3 to 6 months. So two key takeaways from our side. One is that you make sure that you are having a proactive conversation, either with a definite extension of tenure or an early payment offer, depending on which category you are sitting, or you are initiating a conversation, or you are holding on tight. But communication and over communication and reaching out to your customers is the key with a specific agenda. Don't go hammer and tongs with every client of yours and say, hey, pay me early, pay me early, pay me early right now. Because they are also going through the same problem. So this framework should more or less guide you and help you on how do you manage your receivables, or at least the cash flow. Now, cash flow has two components, right? You have the payables and you have the receivables. And while this may sound slightly counterintuitive, but from a small bootstrapped or friends and family funded startup, one should also understand that it has taken you a long time to build a culture, build the team, build the right kind of people that you have in the organization. If you're going to cut costs significantly, and if it is a survival conversation, that's absolutely fine. But don't get into this thing saying that everybody's cutting cost and hence I want to cut cost and we want to let go of people. Because you may win the battle, but you lose the war in the long term. You are not going to hire a new guy in the next 6 months. The next guy will take another 6 months to understand the entire business. By the time the market is already moved ahead. So in all the communication that is coming through media, through all the things, please be very cognizant of your own payables, your own client set, create a framework around it, and then go pushing whatever is the agenda. At Expertise, and as Prakash rightly mentioned, we are the experts to help you have these conversations with your large anchors, and we'll be more than happy to assist.
No, thank you, Regan. You laid down a very good framework for people to start looking at how do I look at my working capital and which clients to actually reach out. So we have almost come to the end of this webinar, and in this webinar we touched basically three broad themes, right? One is that there are a variety of different classes of funding or capital available. Not only the four panelists here are representative of their asset class, but even within the organization, there are a variety of products that are available to actually help you out in the current situation. The second thing that we touched upon is the initiatives and the best practices, right? So the initiatives that have been launched by the government and the best practices of how the startups and the MSMEs should look at, right? And the third very important thing that we all touched upon is that how do we currently survive in the situation, right? So very, very COVID specific, there are certain things that we need to take care upon when we reach out to not only the four panelists here or to the sources of capital, but to the customers. What should we talk about? To the internal employees, how should we communicate to them? To the other stakeholders of the ecosystem, your own vendors, your own suppliers, right? So those are the three broad themes that we touched. I think we have maybe a little bit time to take one or two questions, right? So let me take one question, with a broader applicability, which is around seed level startup, right? So the question says that is it realistic to expect venture debt for a seed level startup? If not, how long do you need to be in operation? Ishpreet, would you like to take this?
Sure. Realistic, interesting word, but basically the only reason why I'll give you genesis for the sake of audience, that why generally venture debt comes in that particular point of time. From a perspective, look, venture debt is there has to be a clear demarcation of equity and debt first of all. It cannot be substituted. So equity cannot be substituted for debt. Debt can't be substituted for equity. For an early stage seed company who requires money for growth, I think it's the worst time to take a debt. Leave alone how to structure that debt, because structuring is very important, critical element in a debt. But if you are at that stage of a company in which you really want to grow a business, venture capital is long-term money, which is not venture debt is for. Venture debt, as I said in the starting of the conversation, can maximum go to 2 to 3 years, depending on how you've structured, right? And this has to be repaid over a period of time. So for an early stage seed stage company, what you require is an equity to grow and give some momentum to a business. Once you have the bit of momentum, and as I said, that for working capital issues, you're trying to block that money, in spite of the fact that it's 500,000, right? It's not a larger amount, but for working capital, I think working capital financing comes in that at that time when you have a bit of equity to support your business, an investor who's trying to support you for a long term, for 5 years, 7 years, or beyond. I think at Loomis, you work on operating model in terms of working very closely with the companies for longer term approach. So I think that's what you require at that point of time. When you have a bit of equity and an investor support to go with you for 8-10 years, I think you should structure your debt beautifully as per your requirements of the business. And having said that, as I said, debt is only required from a perspective of the business model. It's not that any business should take debt. It's as per the structuring of the business that you should be taking debt.
Got it. No, this is great. And coming specifically on seed stage financing. Speaking from experience, seed stage financing is something which you have to take it from friends and families, and from your own capital, and from there are seed stage and angel forums that you can approach to actually get that kind of a funding. These days, seed stage funding is actually, it's a great time for business reset. And if the business model that you are talking about is a very pertinent business model which can thrive in a post-COVID world, I think there are enough seed investors who will be interested in doing a complete reset and looking at a completely new model. So that was on seed funding. Maybe let's take one more question before we wrap up. The question is, pertinent to the strategy of raising additional capital, and it's a more of a philosophy level question that should the lending strategy be looked at as a kind of a stopgap to sail through COVID-19 and a short-term play, or should it be looked at as an alternative to get a longer-term, VC or any other kind of longer-term, equity funding? So. Anyone here would like to take up that question? Is it a short-term or a long-term kind of a play? Whatever kind of funding we should be looking at.
I just give my bit on this. I think it's basically, as I said, debt is available for both kind of businesses, right? So I don't think it's a particularly stopgap arrangement for COVID scenarios. As I said in the starting of the conversation, post-COVID, I see a lot of companies, because of the equity dry run, expected a bit. Naturally, there are uncertainties. You can't tell how long it will take, whether it's 6 months or a year. I think that can play a vital role in terms of structuring those solutions, depending on the state of the business of yours.
Got it.
These are not, product categories that you can replace with each other. And from a supplier standpoint, the control on products and their appropriate usage, that discipline is only going to go up in these times. It's not going to relax further. So the choice of taking debt to serve the purpose of equity and so on, those windows are going to be relatively limited. I also agree that each of these products has optimal use. I think from promoter standpoint, they have to understand that this is not the time to over leverage their businesses. This is the time to actually try and get more equity into the business and hence reduce the risk in the business. Right. over-leveraged businesses will see disproportionate hit over the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah.
In general, the direction should be to improve the health of the balance sheet and not to over-leverage.
No, true. And just saying my 2 cents there. What I have seen is that in these times, the equity component, which is primarily the promoter contribution, is the part that plays a lot of role. And you can look at it from a share market point of view as well, where there are a lot of companies which are doing buyback issues. But of course, it also depends upon the promoter and their own financial health as to how much they can fund their own business. So with all of these perspectives and few questions, we have come to the end of today's session. Just talking about Supply Chain Labs, we are a fund and accelerator, and we are also looking at really great startups, particularly in the supply chain domain, to understand what they are doing, which is different, and how they would survive and thrive in this COVID affected environment. And we are running this forum, this series of webinars every Saturday with a very pertinent topic. We will be picking up a topic of business rejig and pivot the next week around. So thank you all for joining this webinar. Thanks a lot, panelists, for spending this close to 75 minutes here in putting together your views and educating the audience. We will be putting up some of the material which we discussed about here on Supply Chain Labs website. Just go to www.supplychainlabs.in and you would get to see some of these resources. Thanks a lot, you all. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.